The ancient Egyptians built colossal pyramids and were real masters of mummification, but that's only half the truth. In the same breath, the pharaohs rubbed their heads with dead mice, had an intimate fondness with crocodile dung, and also appreciated a well-kept garlic enema. Do you want to know what unimaginable things were still the order of the day back then? Then hit the like and subscribe buttons and be sure to stay tuned until the end. Police monkeys. What the sheepdog is today, the baboon was thousands of years ago. Historical records show that the ancient Egyptians trained primates to hunt criminals. For this purpose, the baboons were led on leashes and released in case of emergency to rush after the lawbreakers. In contemporary works, we see the baboons grabbing the leg of a long-fingered thief and catching him in the act. Away from their police duties, the apes were also trained for other purposes. These included, for example, gathering fruit or dancing. In fact, the primates were so firmly anchored in the culture of the Egyptians that even mummies with baboon tattoos have been found. Contraceptives. To prevent unwanted pregnancies, the ancient Egyptians used an unusual contraceptive. They rubbed their genital area with a mixture of honey and crocodile dung. What may sound repulsive to us today was surprisingly effective in ancient times. The excrement of the armored lizards actually killed the sperm. Hair restorer. The ancient Egyptians also suffered from hair regrowth at times and tackled this problem in a very bizarre way. To combat the onset of baldness, the pharaoh's empire dwellers smeared their skulls with a mixture consisting of fat, honey, and ground-up dead mice. This peculiar mixture testifies to the boundless ingenuity of the Egyptians. But how effective the tincture actually was is another matter entirely. Hair care. The grotesque hair care of ancient Egyptians does not end at this point. When it was necessary to blacken the hair, people used the blood of an ox. In turn, the black horn of a gazelle was used to cover gray strands. The rotten liver of donkeys was also a popular dye at the time. Garlic suppositories. Even today, garlic is used as an effective home remedy, and even the ancient Egyptians knew about the medical properties of the punji bulbs. However, to fully exploit the potential of garlic, they inserted the cloves into the rectum. The use of the garlic suppositories was subject to a firm belief that the healing properties could be absorbed through the rectal mucosa. Eye makeup. The fact that both women and men used makeup in ancient Egypt is common knowledge. However, the ancient kohl served not only for visual adornment, but also for protection. On one hand, the dark, bold lines around the eyes were supposed to keep away evil spirits and demonic forces. On the other hand, the makeup also offered some earthly benefits, serving as an antibacterial agent and prevented eye infections. The widespread use of kohl proves that ideals of beauty, spiritual beliefs, and practical benefits went hand in hand at the time. Fake breasts. In ancient Egyptian art, it was not uncommon to depict men with full breasts and fake nipples. While this depiction seems unusual or even somewhat comical nowadays, it possesses a profound symbolism at the time. Thus, the protruding breasts and artificial nipples represented the power and fertility of the man. Phallic festivals. And speaking of fertility, the ancient Egyptians placed such a high value on procreation that they even held festivals and rituals dedicated exclusively to the phallus. Where procreation and the continuation of life were celebrated, dances, music, and large gatherings were the order of the day. The festivals also testified to the deep respect that the ancient Egyptians had for the mysteries of life and the divine creation. Worship of cats. Even a brief look at the cat goddess Bastet is enough to realize one thing. The ancient Egyptians ascribed to an extraordinary status to the house pets. Revered as sacred animals, cats at the time symbolized protection and fertility. Anyone who owned a velvet paw himself could be assured that his household was under a lucky star. However, the ancient Egyptian gift of cats extended even beyond death. For example, thousands and thousands of cats were mummified with great reverence at the time to ensure that the four-legged friends would be well preserved in the afterlife. Cat grief. With this in mind, it should surprise no one that the Egyptians also expressed mourning when a beloved cat died. In such a case, all affected family members shaved off their eyebrows. Cats were so popular at the time that in the event of a building fire, people would rescue the four-legged friends before putting out the fire. Skull manipulations. Those who belonged to a certain social status naturally wanted to show this to the outside world. Therefore, certain members of the ancient Egyptian elite were subject to a bizarre practice aimed at deforming and artificially lengthening a person's skull. For this purpose, the heads of noble infants were tightly bound together with cloth or other materials, so that their noble origin would be visually attested. Recognized as a symbol of aesthetics and grandeur, the practice illustrates that idiosyncratic ideals of beauty are probably almost as old as humanity itself. The fertilization of the Nile. According to an ancient Egyptian legend, the primordial god Atum created the world by, ejaculating. In the belief of the pharaohs, the Nile was closely connected with the divine seed, which paved the way for the unfolding of the universe. But that's not all. The pharaohs practiced a special ritual in which they did the same as Atum. In this way, the divine gift that nourished the Nile, necessary for survival, was to be renewed. The sacred rite took place during the so-called Festival of Min. Arriving on the bank of the river, the king got rid of his clothes and did what he had to do. Afterwards, it was time for the rest of the men to follow Pharaoh's example. The Egyptians believed that the delighted Nile would reward them in return with an abundant harvest. Sacred excrement. What is a necessary evil for us was a sign of immortality for the Egyptians. Thousands of years ago, the inhabitants of ancient times admired the scarab, considering it a symbol of creation. The beetles bury their eggs in animal feces, so their descendants literally hatch from the dirt. Intrigued by the blossoming of new life, the Egyptians considered the spherical animal dung sacred. The beetles pushing out of the dung balls represented, among other things, the passage of the sun. Furthermore, the pharaohs' empires used the beetle dung along with that of dogs, donkeys, and gazelles in medicine. Daily beer. No one can refuse a beer in honor. What is still listed as a staple food in the Bavarian Food Act today was also firmly part of everyday life in ancient Egypt. In fact, beer was even consumed daily at the time, by adults as well as children. This had a very simple background, that the Egyptians believed it was safer to drink beer instead of water. Thus, fermentation acted as a natural purification process that killed harmful bacteria. However, the ancient brew had little in common with our beers today. It was a type of bread drink that had a much lower alcohol content. Pregnancy test. If an Egyptian woman wanted to know if she was expecting a child, she only had to do one thing: urinate on barley and wheat seeds. If the seeds sprouted, the woman was carrying a child under her heart. Moreover, this method even allowed to determine the sex of the baby. If the wheat seed sprouted, it was a boy, and if the barley seed sprouted, it was a girl. How the ancient Egyptians came up with these wacky pregnancy tests, we have no idea. Love for sale. The oldest trade of mankind flourished in Egypt as well, and it was perfectly legal. If a woman's husband had died, she was free to pursue this profession. Also, virginity before marriage used to have no special value. Two parties could have an intimate relationship with each other, provided neither of them was married. Adultery, however, was punishable by death. Menstruating men. Nowadays, when a man excretes blood, all alarm bells immediately ring. The situation was somewhat different in ancient Egypt. Back then, diseases like schistosomiasis were so widespread that people didn't even consider the appearance of blood to be unusual. Instead, they considered it to be the natural menstruation of men, which was part of growing up. The Egyptians even believed that bleeding men were especially fertile. Cleopatra's invention. She was one of the most beautiful and famous rulers in the history of the world and left a very special legacy to the ladies of creation. At least that's what an ancient legend says. To stimulate herself, Cleopatra is said to have used a papyrus bag filled with bees and unceremoniously invented the first vibrator in history. Toothpaste. Even though, of course, there were no dental offices in ancient Egypt, the pharaoh's empire dwellers placed a certain value on oral hygiene. What is today a mint-scented cream was then, however, a mixture of powdered ox hooves, ash, burnt eggshells, and pumice. Same-sex love. The depictions that adorn the joint tomb of Nyankenem and Kananhotep suggest the pressing conclusion that same-sex love was socially accepted in ancient Egypt. For example, the reliefs show the two men in intimate embraces with their noses touching, symbolizing the closest possible closeness in the art of the time. However, it is also worthwhile at this point to take a look at those things that remain unmentioned in contemporary sources. For example, no ancient Egyptian document mentions that same-sex relationships were considered reprehensible. Furthermore, there was no indication that homosexual acts were punishable, so it is very likely that they were tolerated. And with that, thanks so much for watching. Feel free to hit the like and subscribe buttons to support us for free and stay up to date at the same time. And now we're interested in your opinion. Which practice from ancient Egypt amazed you the most? We're looking forward to your comment.